Hey guys, what's happening? So I'm back from a little break and we are jumping back into Maestro, War and Pax, which continues with the Peter David true story type of approach versus what Maestro would want us to believe, but at the same time telling a real story of how he got there. So let's get into it. But first, if you're new to the channel, be sure to subscribe to get your spills every week, and don't forget to hit that bell up top so we can squat up in the comments for the first hour. Alright, so when we jump back in, we pick up with like the cliffhanger, or better yet, the continuation from the cliffhanger. You don't pick up with the cliffhanger, what I'm talking about. But it's here where we pick up with the visitor who had came to see the Pantheon, who we had seen before was Dr. Doom. And originally when he gets there, Lanta, she instructs the others to like just ignore him and he'll go away. But at the same time, this is Doom that we're talking about, so the fact that he found them was a great feat within itself. But with Lanta just telling the others to ignore him and he'll go away, like initially it's quiet for a little bit, but then before you know it, Doom just teleports inside of their base. And immediately when it happens, there's like this, okay, well that didn't work kind of vibe in the air. But then when Doom just appears on the inside and Hector is like, okay Victor, well you just use some teleportation device of some sort, and Doom's just kind of like, yeah, more or less. But with Hector continuing to call Dr. Doom just Victor, Doom then reminds Victor that it's either Doom or Dr. Doom. And it takes a bit of a funny turn because Hector is then like, well, do you have a medical degree or a doctorate of some sort? And when he says that, Doom is just quiet for a minute and he just looks at him. And then he just blasts Hector right into the wall. Like, but Doom didn't come here for a fight, but he ain't come here to explain himself either. But even with this happening, Lanta then asks Doom like, what is it exactly that he wants? And he simply lets her know, just tea and chat, just reiterating that he simply just wants to talk. And so now moments later, once the tension has died down and Hector still in his feelings, but then it's here where Doom tells the Pantheon like, for one, how he's here and not like 150 years old. And he lets them know simply that he's made his way here through time travel. But then also with him expressing to the Pantheon that he's aware of their reputation and what they stand for and their core ideal of making the world a better place, much like what we talked about in the last video, because at least that's where the Pantheon's direction had started. And even at this point, they're still that type of team, but even still, like, there are some events that have taken place recently, which we'll get into more in a little bit, which have caused more of an internal conflict within the team. But even still, we'll see a bit of that unfold as we move forward. But with Doom bringing up the whole idea of the Pantheon's mission of world betterment, and in a very forward way, more or less telling them that they suck at it, you know, given the circumstance and the current state of the world. But even still, like, in their defense, they never were like a superhero save the world type of team. And for the most part, at least from what I remember in the older issues, like their tactics were very passive. Like for instance, before, their solution for stopping the Hulk was pretty much inducting him into their team and then giving him training lessons. So Doom kind of got a point here, like either way you look at it. But with telling them this, Doom then lets them know that he's been monitoring this present time, and with doing so, the Maestro has come to his attention, which on one hand brought Doom to see the Pantheon, being that they teamed up with Banner at one point. But with him asking them about Maestro and them responding that they know, they more or less tell him that they don't know too much about him, when the truth is they've seen him and they decided not to deal with it. But then it also sparks the question of, with Doom, like, why is he here and why does he care? Which in his case, he's very discreet with by telling them he's capricious, which more or less just means that when he arrived there, he had seen things that had caused him to feel different about the current state and situation. But Doom also lets him know, like, as far as whatever they're going to do, they gotta handle it quick. Because if Maestro sees Doom with the Pantheon, immediately he's gonna picture them as his opponent. And through the course of running through different ideas, with one, like killing him, that idea is shot down because he's immortal. And unlike the Pantheon, like, the Hulk is immortal, and members of the Pantheon can actually die. But after this, they then come to the idea of reducing Maestro back to Banner, which in that case will at least give them something that they can work with. Because right now, with Maestro being the Hulk with the mind of Banner, the chances are slim. But if they can reduce him to Banner with the body of Banner, then they could at least lock him up and just constrain him instead. But then not long after this, we then jump over to Alchemax, which is one of the locations which Maestro's been using to produce his Dogs of War, and at this point he's using to rebuild more after that crazy explosion we had seen back in DC. And it's here where we see the Minister, who's come to summon Maestro, who initially is scared out of his wits when he's pounced on by one of the Dogs of War. But with the Minister coming up to this level, he's come here to summon Maestro because he has a visitor. And initially the Minister calls him like the Parthenon or something, but even with messing it up, Maestro immediately knows that he's talking about the Pantheon. But like now with the minister telling Maestro like your friends are here to see you. But with doing so, it's like the minister's like, are these really friends this time? Because like we've seen before, or the minister, he's also seen prior to this point, that the Maestro, he kind of has this pattern of running into old friends to where every time, like at some point, they just try to kill him. But this time the Maestro assures him that the Pantheon, they are his actual friends and that he agrees to meet with them. And like at this point, like when we jump over to the throne, like I'm just glad that they brought in Ajax at this point, because with Ajax, like he's really strong, but he's not that bright. And because of that, it really makes for some fun and just humorous moments. Because while they're waiting on Maestro, Ajax then asks one of the guards like, hey, can I sit in the throne? And the guard is like, yeah, I wouldn't do that if I was you. And Ajax is like, well, are you me? And the guard's like, no. And Ajax is just really trying to make sense out of it. And like telling the guard like, okay, since you not me, can I sit down in it? And the guard just says the same thing. Like, you know, like I wouldn't. And Ajax is like, okay. But what about me though? And it's really like a facepalm moment to the rest of the team, but I enjoy these Ajax moments because he's never really been the type of character who is written to be taken serious. But with him going back and forth with the guard, Maestro then shows up, and immediately it turns into a brawl between Ajax and Maestro. And like immediately when this happened, like I had initially thought that Ajax, he just picked back up with fighting the Hulk like in the late 80s, early 90s, because back then, Ajax was either trying to protect Lanta or Ulysses from Professor Hulk, whether one time or another. But really here, we come to find out that it was just Maestro's entrance that startled him, which very much felt like an attack, but it wasn't. But even with this happening, Lanta steps in, she calms down Ajax, and from here, Maestro invites them to feast and more or less just catch up. But it's here where they then tell the Maestro, like for one, the mound, their head base and location, like since it was destroyed, they had relocated in Canada. And I'll say like prior to this point, I thought they were still located in Nevada. So that's an update, Pantheon's in Canada. But then while they're here catching up, Lanta, she then asks Maestro, like, what's the whole deal with the Pax thing? And Maestro lets him know, pretty straightforward, post-apocalyptic existence, and as long as everyone does what he says, they live in peace. And for the Pantheon, who's hearing this from his mouth for the first time, they're pretty quiet, and they kind of look at each other for a moment, and then they just look at him like, oh yeah, that's great, yeah, great, just sign me up. And Ajax ain't even paying attention, he just enjoying the food. But then it's here with Lanta, she tells Maestro that this idea sounds great and all, but he's probably gonna have a problem with AIM. And when she tells this to Maestro and she asks him like, are you familiar with AIM? At that point, Maestro's just kind of like, am I? And from there, he goes on to give them a bit of history, letting them know like AIM is the reason why he's here right now. Because of MODOK, who had him in hypersleep for so long, at least to the moment where he woke up and broke out. And like with trying to be slick and ask for Maestro a bit more information from Maestro, Lanta then asks him like, how did you get out? And from there, Maestro's just more or less like, if I want to leave somewhere, I'ma go. Which is a bit self-explanatory within its own right. But then after this, he goes on to tell them that he had met Vapor while he was in there, and later on he had called for her services. But when they ask what sort of services did she provide, like what did he need, he then brushes over it like, oh, that don't matter, like that's neither here or there. Which really goes to show us early on, like on many sides there are people holding information which they really just don't want others to know. And even up to this point, it's building tension like within the different groups, and we'll talk about how that plays out in just a minute. But at this point with Lanta expressing to Maestro that the Pantheon is on his side and also that they're in agreement with Pax, it's here where Maestro then asks her like what exactly is it that she wants with AIM. And her response is that AIM killed Prometheus, who prior to this point was a former member of the Pantheon. And with hearing this, Maestro's then like, you've come to the right place, we both have a common enemy, and with that being the case, let's just do what needs to be done. But after this, when Maestro goes with them and boards on their ship, at first he questions the ship because it's pretty small. And Lantum lets him know like, oh, don't worry about it, we got bunker busters, like we'll open up AIM and then you lead the way. And so then when Lanta, she sets the course, Maestro has a seat and he then asks like, okay, well, how exactly did Prometheus die? And quickly, Lanta responds like, I don't want to talk about it. And when she says that, Maestro kind of gives her the side eye like, really? But then immediately, Maestro turns around to Ajax and he's like, how did Prometheus die? Go! And immediately Ajax was just like, he got sick and it was sad. Like Ajax just blew their cover just like that. But with Maestro being aware that he's being lied to, he knows immediately now that this is a setup. And right after Ajax had told the truth, Maestro had then grabbed Lanta by the neck and he demands that the others tell him what's going on because Lanta is pretty much a thumbs up away from meeting her maker. But with Maestro telling them to come clean or else, Ulysses then tells Maestro, more or less, that they don't need to do anything because he's gonna put her down. which is exactly what happens because when Lanta was setting the course, she had also activated a knockout gas that could take out a herd of whales, which effectively worked, compliments of Dr. Doom. But as far as the Pantheon, they weren't affected because each of them were wearing nose filters the whole time. But with doing this, they've effectively captured Maestro, and from here they inform Doom, and with doing so, Lanta lets them know that now it's time to head into phase 2. But before we wrap up, I wanted to talk about like the true story of Prometheus, or like what happened to him, because we start to get glimpses of his story, which had taken place not long after all the nuclear explosions had wiped out the majority of the world. But after this had happened, like when we had seen the rise of the group called the Black Scythe, who had more or less had like the Grim Reaper as their mascot, and I mean it makes sense, it's in the name, Black Scythe. But also we had seen that they attacked a number of cities with poisonous gas, but years ago in the case of the Pantheon, this was seen by Delphi, and when she had seen this and they had sent Prometheus out, he was then infected and he died. And it was really his death that made things kind of volatile for the team immediately after, because with Delphi seeing her premonition of the Black Scythe, she didn't see the poisonous gas, and because of that Prometheus went in unprepared, and not to mention like his last words was like, this is your fault, and Delphi has to live with that. But then the next thing we see right after this, like right after Prometheus had died, it was then Lanta given the instructions that the Pantheon would hunt down every last member of the Black Scythe in order to achieve vengeance from them killing one of her own. But from here we'll have to wait and see how exactly that panned out, because for now it's only letting us know like what happened to the team. But real quick before we go, I want to give a special shout out to the new patrons. Shout out to Jonathan M who jumped to silver, shout out to Luisito H, Bernard U, and Sander D. So thank you guys for all of your support, and for anyone who's new here who wants more information on how to support the channel, I got a link below to where you can go to patreon.com/dopespill. But that'll do it for this one, guys. Let me know your thoughts down in the comments below, and we'll do it again on the next one. Alright, later.